morning, everybody. President Biden saying he is laser focused on fighting inflation, but for the American people, relief is nowhere in sight. Check out the price of gas today. Good morning, everybody. I'm Bill Hemmer. Dana's got the day off today. Hello to our old friend.
And it is
to our very young friend, but dear colleague. How you doing?
I'm happy to be with you this morning, Bill. Good morning to you. All right, well, let's kick things off here. This is America's Newsroom. The price of gasoline, it surged to another all-time high, $4.67 a gallon. It's record after record at this point. And driving this latest increase is the EU moving to cut off 90% of Russian oil imports. So that's going to have an effect here at home. Check out this gas station in L.A. near Hollywood. That is not a movie. That's $8.05 a gallon. I mean, we need a new word for sticker shock, because I don't know what you think when you drive up and see that to fill up your tank. Making matters worse is this nationwide labor shortage. We've been talking about it for quite some time, but now we are anticipating brand new numbers out this morning, 10 a.m. Eastern time. Those numbers are expected to show roughly 11.5 million job openings in this country. That is nearly twice as many jobs as there are people looking for work. So the president repeatedly insisting inflation was transitory, but during his administration, you could see it's continued to climb and climb higher, surging to 8.3% under his watch, which is, as we know now, that's a 40-year high, Sandra. The White House has tried to paint a rosy picture of all of this. You saw the president's piece published this week, but at least one member of the president's team is now appearing to admit some fault in all of this.
I was wrong then about the path that inflation would take. As I mentioned, there have been unanticipated and large shocks to the economy that have boosted energy and food prices, and supply bottlenecks that have affected our economy badly that I at the time didn't fully understand.
Okay, so Jackie Heinrich begins our coverage from the North Lawn to talk about the strategy and the news around it now. Hey, Jackie, good morning.
Good morning to you, Bill. The president's meeting with Fed Chair Jerome Powell kicks off this month-long White House push to highlight what they're doing to bring down inflation with only a few months to go before the midterms. The president promised to let the Fed do its job without interference, which also gives him some distance from the problem and how quickly it is or is not resolved. A shift away, though, all of this from the administration's current strategy, where they've been clinging to projections that prices would come down relatively soon and defending pandemic spending that some critics have blamed for exacerbating inflation. According to the Wall Street Journal, some White House officials said they should publicly accept blame the stimulus contributed to higher prices, while also arguing their work was worthwhile. But others in the West Wing are strongly opposed. Publicly, the White House isn't taking any blame yet for not acting faster.
I just disagree with that, and I could quote you 20, 30 other experts who had different projections, who thought inflation was coming down.
But the White House is continuing to face questions about whether the country is headed into a recession. Most recently, Biden said a recession at this point is not inevitable. But Larry Summers, former Treasury Secretary under President Obama, is less optimistic.
Inflation's above 4 and unemployment's below 4. You are almost certain to have a recession within the next 2 years.
How bad?
Now, we may somehow find a way of beating the odds and having a soft landing, but it would be a historic counterexample.
Now, adding to this effort to show that the White House is bringing in outside experts to address all these problems, the president today will meet with baby formula manufacturers to get an update on production after an NBC report yesterday alleged that he was frustrated that he wasn't briefed about this problem sooner, only getting his first briefing within about a month ago. Bill?
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Jackie. Jackie Heinrich leading us off right there from the North Lawn. Gallup's got a new survey out. What do you think is the most important problem facing the country today?
Hit me.
That was the question. Here is the answer. The government/poor leadership was at 19%. Inflation, it ticked behind at 18%, along with the high cost of living. They see the economy in general down there 12%, which kind of they go together, right? 1B and 1C. You have to defend your ideas in a time like this.
100%.
And you can judge for yourself as to whether or not they're doing a good job defending their ideas and defending their plans.
And I know you had Brian Deese on the program yesterday, and he was deployed to certainly do just that. We also had another member of the president's team on with us yesterday.
In the afternoon, right?
And the question is, what are they forecasting with this rollout of their economic plan to get things going again? I haven't seen real specifics, real, quantitative analysis that says where they can get this economy in the next 2 months, the next 4 months, the next 6 months. And that's an outstanding question, in my opinion.
Okay. All right.
All right, we'll try to press for more answers. Okay, meanwhile, the Justice Department filing an appeal to reinstate masks on airplanes, trains, and other public transportation. A federal judge ruled in April to lift that mandate. Jonathan Seri is live in Atlanta, home of the CDC, for us this morning. So, Jonathan, are the masks going back on?
That remains up in the air, literally. In its appeal, the Justice Department argues that the CDC does have the authority to impose mandates when it's in the interest in public health. And according to the filing, the CDC properly established that the nation's transportation system presents unique risks. People from diverse parts of the country, each part with different levels of COVID activity, share tight quarters for extended periods of time. And federal health officials say wearing masks reduces the risk of COVID transmission. The Biden administration has been keen to restore the federal government's ability to impose mask mandates in times of places of high transmission. CDC officials have yet to say whether they would actually reinstate the travel mask mandate immediately if the DOJ wins its appeal. For now, the agency's website says CDC continues to recommend that people wear masks in indoor public transportation settings at this time. Now, all this is unfolding as daily infections are rising in the U.S. and 59% of active cases involve a new Omicron subvariant that early studies suggest can still infect people even if they developed immunity against the original Omicron variant. While current vaccines cannot block all infections, federal health officials say the shots, along with antiviral treatments for higher risk patients, significantly reduce the number of hospitalizations and deaths. But whether they take the added precaution of bringing masks back to planes, trains, and other forms of public transportation is yet to be seen. Sandra?
Okay, we'll watch what happens. Jonathan Seri in Atlanta for us. Jonathan, thank you.
Meanwhile, Sandra, they're still counting votes in Pennsylvania, and there could be even more uncertainty in that Republican Senate primary race. The Supreme Court putting on hold the counting of mail-in ballots that do not have a date on the envelope. This happening as Dr. Mehmet Oz leaves David McCormick by about 900 votes, and Brian Yennis in New York City with more from there. Hey, Brian, good morning.
Bill, good morning. Yeah, good morning. Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito issued a temporary stay, putting a hold on the counting of undated ballots in Pennsylvania as the Supreme Court weighs the issue in the coming days. The question is whether mail-in ballots that were received on time but are missing the required handwritten date on the outer envelope should count. The Third Circuit Court of Appeals said yes, the Supreme Court could now overturn that decision. This comes amid an automatic recount in the Republican Senate primary in Pennsylvania. Dr. Mehmet Oz leads Dave McCormick by just 900 votes. There are some 800 or so GOP undated ballots up for grabs in this race. Yesterday, both campaigns argued in Commonwealth Court over the fate of undated ballots. The McCormick campaign says undated ballots should count because handwritten dates are immaterial since ballots are time-stamped anyway. The Republican National Committee joined Dr. Oz in court, arguing undated ballots should not count and the courts should not usurp Pennsylvania's election law requiring voters to write dates on their mail-in ballots.
You need to follow the rules that they've set. And we're not disenfranchising people by doing that. People are enfranchised by having the right in America to vote. They simply need to follow the rules. And you can't change the rules, as is what's happening here. You can't change the rules after an election.
In court yesterday, both campaigns said this primary was a free and fair election with no fraud, Bill, but yet the McCormick campaign filed a petition yesterday calling on the courts to order hand recounts in 12 counties where they believe fraud or error led to a miscount of votes.
On it goes. Thank you, Brian. Nice to see you back in New York. Thank you.
And speaking of the Supreme Court, it's also taking action in Texas. The justice is temporarily blocking a law there that would ban social media companies from removing content on their platforms. The vote was 5-4 with an unusual breakdown of conservative and liberal justices. The ruling puts the Texas law on hold while the case plays out in the lower courts.
As I went in, I just saw a whole bunch of kids running off campus, jumping through the windows, cops breaking windows, and just a complete chaos pretty much.
One can only imagine. That's a Border Patrol agent recounting the moment he ran into that school last week in Texas. State investigators are saying that a request for an interview with the police chief of the school has gone unanswered for a number of days. Casey Stiegel's live in Uvalde with more from there today. Casey, hello.
Bill, good morning. According to Texas DPS, the police chief of the school district that you're talking about did do an interview immediately or right after the shooting, but has not responded to the requests for follow-up interviews for going on 3 days now. Pete Arredondo was, however, sworn in behind the scenes in a private ceremony yesterday for his new city council seat that he was elected to a few weeks before the shooting. A federal investigation is now focused on how the law enforcement response he was in charge of reacted that day. Meantime, DPS also released another version of events that morning, now saying that the door through which the shooter entered was not propped open, as they initially said. The teacher closed it, and it did not lock automatically as it should have. Fox News sitting down late Tuesday with a young survivor of the shooting, who describes what she saw from her 10-year-old eyes.
And then he shot the girl next to me, and she said, "I've been shot." And I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want him to come over and shoot me, so I said quiet, and he came back and shot her again because she wouldn't be quiet.
Funerals and visitation services continue today. 10-year-old Ilana Torres will be among those whose obituary reads, at such a young age, she was a loving and compassionate person with a smile that could light up your soul. It will take about 2.5 weeks for all of the services to be held. There are only 2 mortuaries in this town, and they are very busy. Wow. Bill.
Gets no better. Casey, thank you. Casey Stiegel back on duty there in Texas.
There's not a single district court in this country other than Washington, D.C., where this would have happened.
So a Clinton campaign lawyer found not guilty of lying to an FBI agent. This at the height of Hillary's presidential campaign 6 years ago. Jonathan Turley will explain why the verdict feels inevitable, does it not? Just a question of time. 19 past the hour now. There's this from yesterday. If you were watching the breaking news, former Hillary Clinton campaign attorney Michael Sussman found not guilty of lying to the FBI. But despite that acquittal, the trial was revealing. Jonathan Turley, George Washington University law professor, Fox News contributor with me now. Sir, good morning to you. Watching a lot of what you were writing yesterday, a lot of what you were tweeting yesterday as well. Did the jury get it right or not?
You know, first of all, I do think there are good faith reasons why the jury might not have found that all the elements were satisfied. But I don't believe that the jury got it right. I think that Sussman clearly lied, and I believe it was material to the investigation. Many of us had raised concerns over the course of this trial about the judge's rulings. I mean, the judge narrowed the scope of potential evidence and arguments that could be raised by the prosecutors. They were also facing what I think no one could seriously argue it was not a very favorable jury for the defense. You know, you had 3 Clinton donors, an AOC donor, even had one juror whose daughter was serving on the same team with Sussman's daughter. I think the judge did commit errors in allowing a couple of those jurors to be seated, but this was a unanimous verdict. At the end of the day, I think that the jury got it wrong. I think the evidence was quite compelling and clear, but ultimately my view doesn't count in terms of that verdict.
Oh, let me go through a few things with you here. In 2016, voters in Washington, D.C. chose Hillary Clinton 91% to 4% over Donald Trump. I read that and I say, well, why don't you move the trial, or did they press for moving the trial out of Washington, D.C.? And then you've got the Wall Street Journal that comes up with this final conclusion, right, on the Sussman trial, the verdict. We learned that Hillary Clinton personally approved leaking the false claim to a reporter, and the campaign of Mrs. Clinton then tweeted the press report approvingly. Just on that point, how could that be significant down the road, if at all?
Well, that's why I called this a nightmare jury pool for the prosecutors. Now, they can sometimes face the same problem, obviously, in conservative jurisdictions. But at 91%, this was just 9 percentage points away from picking a jury out of the DNC headquarters from the perspective of the prosecutors. That doesn't mean that these jurors cannot be impartial, but I think anyone would reasonably say that this was one of the least favored jurisdictions for these prosecutors. Now, those concerns were magnified when one juror reportedly, according to the Washington Times, told their reporter that, frankly, that she didn't see why this should be such a great concern, that lying to the FBI is not a big deal. That's like a juror coming out of an arson verdict saying that fire is not a big deal. I mean, that's the focus of the trial. If she had said that in voir dire, she would have likely generated a challenge by prosecutors.
Oh, on that point, here it is, the quote, guys, call for two. There are bigger things. This is what the jury apparently, a juror told the Washington Times. There are bigger things that affect the nation than a possible lie to the FBI. 5 months from now, Igor Danchenko is on trial for 5 counts of lying to the FBI. He's the one who helped contribute as the source to the Steele dossier. What would be your expectation then after going through what we saw yesterday?
Well, that case is different in a number of respects. First of all, it's being tried across the river in Northern Virginia, but also there's a series of alleged false statements. And the case, I think, is going to be more of a challenge for the defense. So I think that we have a special counsel gearing up for that. The question is whether John Durham has other potential indictments that might come down. And one of the issues that many of us have raised is whether he will be allowed to produce a report, just like Mueller did. Many Democrats insisted that a report be made public after the end of the Mueller investigation. The same should be true with John Durham. What was clear from the Sussman trial is that we're looking likely at an iceberg of evidence where only a small percentage was allowed above the waterline.
Well, wait until then. Meanwhile, we'll put you on standby for the Heard and Johnny Depp verdict, all right? So do not go far, sir, in Washington, D.C. Thank you for your time. Jonathan Turley, nice to see you.
Thanks, Bill.
You bet. Here's Sandra.
Another potentially damaging economic report is set to be released a bit later this morning, a short time from now, actually, as our nation's labor shortage may be getting even worse. Fox Business anchor David Asman here to crunch those numbers for us. And as Bill and Jonathan just mentioned, any moment now, the verdict in the Johnny Depp mega $1 million defamation trial could be reached against ex-wife Amber Heard. We're watching for it. We'll bring it to you when that happens.
If we make these investments now, with interest rates at historic lows, we'll generate more growth, higher incomes, a stronger economy.
I really do not expect that we'll be in a situation where inflation rises to troubling levels.
Is there a risk of inflation? I think there's a small risk, and I think it's manageable.
What a difference a year makes. Americans are feeling the crush of historic inflation after the president and his team repeatedly insisted it would not be a problem. And it certainly is. Let's bring in Fox Business anchor David Asman. Great to see you this morning,
David.
Great
to see you both.
You know, even the Washington Post out with a very lengthy piece attacking just that, how policymakers in this country misjudge the inflation threat. And this massive inflation caught Washington by surprise. It goes date by date. how that was done in Washington.
Well, and you talked to Gene Sperling yesterday. All of the administrators, they don't really have answers. First, they come out a year ago. We all remember those barbecues that were supposed to cost less than they did the year before to try to convince Americans that there was no inflation. Well, we all found out that just wasn't true, and it wasn't passing the muster even with the Washington Post. The Washington Post, by the way, the editorials have become much more critical of Joe Biden. You compare them today with the way they were a year ago. There's been a fundamental shift in the editorial pages of a lot of liberal newspapers like the Washington Post, but leading with the Washington Post. Because, again, they focus on the problems that are facing Americans, and they find out that the White House is not focusing. They deflect. Whose fault is it, the inflation that we now have? Well, Biden put it all on the Fed last week, and now Janet Yellen is becoming the fall woman for the situation. The administration won't take responsibility for inflation, its role in inflation, one, in terms of spending money that they don't have, and they just are coming out with this new student loan stunt, as the Washington Post calls it, of spending about $300 billion for relatively well-off students and families who are going to get this enormous gift, a $10,000 write-off on their loans. That's going to cost about $300 billion. So you add all this spending up, and it causes inflation. I mean, it's the administration. It's not the Fed. The Fed has a role to play, but the primary role is spending trillions and trillions of dollars that they don't have, that the Fed then has to monetize by printing money.
Just two things on this. There was clearly a strategy to get this all out. Joe Biden had that editorial in the Wall Street Journal yesterday. Janet Yellen agrees to go on CNN and says this. Right. Wolf Blitzer. Watch.
I was wrong then about the path that inflation would take. As I mentioned, there have been unanticipated and large shocks to the economy that have boosted energy and food prices and supply bottlenecks that have affected our economy badly that I at the time didn't fully understand.
Listen, she's right about a lot of what she's saying there, but also you had the $2 trillion that was pumped in the early part of this administration. Right. That term, and there's a bunch of think pieces out today. NBC's got one, CNN's got one, Politico's got a piece too. If you think about what the strategy was in 2009, upon reflection, the Obama administration did not think they went big enough. Right? And so Joe Biden thinks we got to really go big here.
Well,
and they went big.
It's interesting. That leads to the question of who's forming this policy of this administration. A lot of people say this is Obama's third term, what we're seeing right now. You focus with Gene Sperling on this. Who's formulating the policies? Where do these figures come from? Who's forecasting? And they couldn't. Gene Sperling, a guy, an insider in the administration, economic insider, couldn't answer that question. He never did, as far as I remember yesterday. But the point is that they come out time and again with stuff that just is not true. This article by Joe Biden yesterday in the Wall Street Journal. I used to be the op-ed editor of the Wall Street Journal. If this had been written by anybody other than the president, I wouldn't have accepted it. There were so many falsehoods, beginning with in January 2021, when I took office, the recovery had stalled. Not true. The economy was growing at 4.5%. That's a very healthy growth in the economy. We just had a quarter this year. The first quarter of this year was down 1.5%. So the economy is falling.
Not to mention that's apparently a blueprint for how they plan to fix the problem. Anyway, we have economic numbers about to come out. Yes. Could show that this is an even tighter labor market than one.
It could. They're delayed today. It's going to be coming out tomorrow. But the other number that is coming out today is those 11.5 million unfilled jobs. We do have a surplus of jobs. But if we get another negative growth quarter, that is, if we have 2 quarters back to back with growth, it's an oxymoron to say negative
contraction
growth.
In the economy.
A contraction of the economy, that leads to recession. That is a recession. And if that happens, those 11.5 million unfilled jobs are going to dry up in no time because the companies offering those jobs won't be around.
Thank you, David. 25 minutes away, we'll get another indicator on that, right?
We will.
Okay, in the meantime, we are on Verdict Watch. Have you heard? We're on Verdict. Johnny Depp, Amber Heard defamation trial. They went into the room on Friday afternoon. They went in the room yesterday. 7-member jury resuming deliberations today after submitting a question to the court Tuesday that dealt with a headline. Mark Meredith is watching that live in D.C. with me now. Hey, Mark, good morning.
Hey, Bill, good morning to you. We are on Verdict Watch, and today for a third day, the 7-person jury in this closely watched case is going to be deliberating over whether actor Johnny Depp or his ex-wife and fellow actress Amber Heard have a case against each other. Now, this jury is made up of 5 men and 2 women. They did not reach a verdict Tuesday. Deliberations, we believe, began about 30 minutes ago, and this trial has already stretched on for more than a month. Depp is suing his ex-wife for $50 million over a 2018 op-ed in the Washington Post in which she discussed being a domestic abuse survivor. And while she did not specifically name Depp, the actor insists it was clear who she was referencing. He's also denying abuse claims. Heard is countersuing for $100 million, claiming Depp's legal team destroyed her reputation. Just yesterday, the jury asked the judge to clarify some instructions on whether they should consider the headline of the op-ed or the entirety of the material when determining one of the claims.
So I think they're just confused as whether it's the whole op-ed or just the title is the statement. And it's clear that the title is the statement. So I was going to answer to say the title is the statement in question.
Depp was not in court yesterday, but fans continue to set up outside the Fairfax, Virginia courthouse awaiting any news. And Bill, the big question, how long will it take for the jury to deliberate? As they say in our business, stand by.
Right on. Thank you, Mark. Nice to see Mark Meredith there. He is not on stage. He is in Washington, D.C. But on stage last night, can you make sense of this?
I don't get that. I really don't understand it.
This is Jeff Beck, who's a world-class guitarist, and that's Johnny Depp.
That part I get.
Okay, this is the Royal Albert Hall in London. Smitty, apparently this is the third night in a row they played. Kate Moss was in the audience last night, according to Deadline, reporting on that.
It's like stress release.
Can you? No, I get it, but right. Okay, so how do you fly from Washington to London? I'm assuming he came back in case there was a verdict yesterday. How do you fly to London 3 times?
That part I don't know.
Or did he? I mean, he's physically on stage, or did he come back for the deliberations? Was he expected to be in the Washington, D.C. area?
Maybe it's a hologram. Maybe it's a hologram version of Johnny Depp.
Well, someday you'll be able to do that.
I'm amazed at the viewership, you know, through the social media, the streaming outlets of watching this trial. People are really into it, and there's a certain audience that's really into it. I've been following it pretty closely.
And?
If one were to make a prediction, it seems like it's leaning in Johnny Depp's favor.
Oh.
I don't know.
Okay.
We'll see. Do you have a hunch?
I have no hunch at all.
Zero.
Well, not yet.
Okay.
I just don't know how to go to London and back repeatedly. Anyway, these guys wrote a song together about 2 years ago. So if you did not know that Jeff Beck, a world-class guitarist, and Johnny Depp had a long-standing relationship, now you do. From Royal Albert Hall.
Thank gosh for that. Okay, well, palace intrigue. Meanwhile, at the White House, President Biden could be eyeing a possible staff shakeup as he sinks in the polls. But is that enough to turn his presidency around? We will speak to Obama's former deputy White House chief of staff. Plus, scorching heat not deterring migrants from crossing into the Rio Grande Valley. Now, congressional Republicans are getting a first-hand look at that crisis.